The Mexican foreign minister addresses the migrant situation on the country's southern border. CARICOM head Mia Mottley condemns U.S. efforts to divide the Caribbean. And protesters reject the arrival of a right-wing Venezuelan opposition figure in London. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South. I am Doris Polo. Around 150 migrants from El Salvador have arrived at the border city of Tecunuman in Guatemala on the heels of the Honduran migrant caravan that arrived last week. They said growing violence and poverty in El Salvador pushed them to make the journey across Central America in hopes of reaching the U.S. border. They also called on the president of El Salvador, Nayib Bukele, to request that Mexican authorities let them pass through their territory.
We came here in peace, just asking to be let through, without conflict. Everyone here is looking for the same thing. If they refuse us entry, well, then we ask our president to talk to the Mexican authorities, so they let us through. We left El Salvador because there is no security, there is no work, the situation is very serious. So that's why we choose to walk.
On Monday, after a tense standoff between the latest migrant caravan and Mexican authorities at Guatemala's northern border, a large group of migrants decided to cross the Suchiate River to make their way into Mexico. Let's take a look.
The migrant caravan started their day early, waking up early in the morning to begin organizing their day with the hope that Mexico would allow them passage as they head for the United States.
We want to go, and we will make it. We will make an agreement, but if we can't, we will still find a way to move forward.
The caravan reached the Rodolfo Robles International Bridge, where the leaders asked the migrants to wait until all the papers were presented to Mexican authorities with the hopes of getting safe passage through Mexico.
We have them 3 hours to give us a concrete answer based on the negotiation with the Mexican government, and if they don't answer in the time given, we will have to think of other ways to gain entry.
After 3 hours, Mexican authorities responded by telling the migrants that giving them safe passage is not part of Mexico's migration laws, while also offering immediate humanitarian assistance, giving priority to women, children, and special cases.
They denied us entry. They want some of us to go through, mainly children. But that's not the way. We had hoped to move through the country.
After the announcement, migrant leaders called on the crowd to cross the Suchiate River, which led to some clashes with Mexican authorities. They say this was a decision based on despair.
We did it because we want to continue our journey from Honduras. And we were not given the permit. We want to work, even if in Mexico, so we can work for our children.
Meanwhile, the Mexican government has announced they will maintain a migrant support program for those who legally stay in the country. But in the cases of those who enter through irregular means, it will implement a return program towards their countries of origin.
The Mexican Foreign Minister Marcelo Ebrard spoke about the need to address the causes of Central American migration at a news conference today.
In the case of Honduras, there are 2 programs that Mexico is supporting. One is called Young People Building the Future, and the other is called Sowing Lives. The latter is more rural-based, while the former is more urban. These are programs that directly pass resources to the beneficiaries. There is no intermediary. It's direct. We still don't have what we need, but we understand that Mexico has to support the creation of jobs in these countries. We've spoken to other countries like the United States. We've said, when are you going to invest? When are we going to see the responsibility of others? That's all Mexico is demanding. This is the most intelligent kind of investment we can make. We're giving alternatives to the people.
Venezuelan Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza is currently in Iran for an official visit. After meeting with his Iranian counterpart, Arreaza spoke about the importance of maintaining alliances between both nations as they both have to deal with a U.S. blockade, while also condemning the role of mainstream media in promoting imperialist interests.
The Islamic Republic of Iran has dealt with aggressions and so-called sanctions for decades. No country has the moral standing to ever impose sanctions on another nation, much less the United States. Nonetheless, Iran has developed its economy and industries to the best of their abilities because they have had to deal with those sanctions. We've learned a lot from their experience, we've exchanged information to overcome the blockade and develop our own economy. A US blockade is in reality a call to strengthen our relations and continue in resistance, respecting peace and international law. The countries which are attacked are the ones that go against the tide and defend their own people, that stand up to imperialism. But that makes us subject to media and psychological plots to distort reality. Iran, Venezuela, Syria, Nicaragua, Cuba, any of the countries that fight imperialism is subject to disinformation campaigns and fake news. That is our reality. And we have to make a great effort to overcome it. Corporate media around the world needs to understand that despite their large resources used for lies, we need to show the truth. The positive as well as the negative, that is the main challenge for the countries under attack.
In other news, social organizations that support Bolivia's movement towards Socialism Party have started debates and community assemblies to choose local candidates for May's general elections.
The nomination of the presidential candidates for the movement towards Socialism Party, with former ministers Luis Arce and David Choquehuanca, is being discussed by social organizations that represent the base of the government of ousted President Evo Morales.
They have to acknowledge the discontent from some people in our groups. We represent a lot of women in Bolivia's 9 departments, and there are also a lot of unions involved. That's why we have asked our president, Evo Morales, to consider candidate David Choquehuanca as the candidate for president.
We were confident. We waited on a good answer from Evo Morales, from our brother who is in Argentina.
Among the lawmakers of the movement towards Socialism Party, who make up 2/3 of the Legislative Assembly, there are some who consider that the issues with the candidates will still be discussed, although there are others who accepted the decision.
Nothing is defined, neither the candidates to president and vice president, nor the candidates to senators and lower house representatives.
A group of lawmakers made a proposal to the campaign chief, and they decided to choose David Choquehuanca and Luis Arce Catacora as candidates. We respect that decision and will begin our work.
But what everyone agrees on is that there is no danger of a split within the ranks of the movement towards Socialism Party, Bolivia's largest political movement.
We are going to gain strength. We are going to organize in the 9 departments. We will support our presidential candidates as well as all the other mass candidates to help our country move ahead.
But the de facto government has already started its attacks against the candidates. The Attorney General recently announced an investigation into Luis Arce for his alleged involvement in a corruption case, while far-right groups have started raising their voices against the progressive candidates.
After the break, we'll take a look at the latest stories from the Welcome back. CARICOM head Mia Mottley says her country will be boycotting a meeting with U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo that's taking place in Jamaica. The Barbados Prime Minister said the decision was taken as only some regional heads were invited, a move she dubbed divisive.
I am conscious that in the next week questions will be asked as to whether the Barbados Foreign Minister happened to be missing from a meeting in Kingston. in Jamaica that will take place on Tuesday. And we don't look to pick fights. I don't look to pick fights. But I am conscious that if this country does not stand for something, then it will fall for anything. As chairman of CARICOM, it is impossible for me to agree that my foreign minister should attend a meeting with anyone to which members of CARICOM are not invited. If some are invited and not all, then it is an attempt to divide this region.
Well, the government of Trinidad and Tobago says it fully supports Barbados' decision to not send a representative to Pompeo's meeting in Jamaica. Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley said his administration shares the view that the meeting goes against the principles of unity among Caribbean nations. He added that his country will not entertain any attempt to divide CARICOM members.
The government, of course, has a very robust sports tourism package, and we see cricket as being a very important.
And Antigua and Barbuda has also expressed that it stands in solidarity with Barbados' decision to skip the meeting with Pompeo. The country's foreign affairs minister reiterated its stance on fostering stronger intra-regional relations and common regional approaches to international relations. Now, Antigua and Barbuda's Prime Minister Gaston Brown has accepted the resignation of his agriculture minister a few days after publicly putting him on notice that he either shape up or ship out. PM Brown admitted that the minister failed to meet his objectives during his tenure.
And I had a real stern discussion with the agriculture minister yesterday, and I said to him, you have to step up. Now, he has said to me that you know, there would have been improvements, but and I'm not necessarily doubting him, but I do not believe that let's say the objectives that we have set to increase agricultural production significantly, that those objectives have been met, at least not fully. And he has to step up, and I'm putting him on the public notice that he either ship up or shape out, or shape up or ship out.
After 20 years, Trinidad and Tobago's parliament will return to the Red House in the capital, Port of Spain. Construction started in the early 2000s, and the historic building was restored with a budget of over $65 million. The original building was destroyed in the 1903 water riots and rebuilt in 1907. The Red House was the scene of a showdown between law enforcement and members of the Jamaat al-Muslimin, who staged a coup to overthrow the government on July 27, 1990. The siege lasted for 6 days. Protesters in Puerto Rico took to the streets of San Juan to call on the governor's resignation following the discovery of unused emergency aid dating back to 2017. Governor Wanda Vasquez fired the island's emergency official following the discovery of the aid, some of which was sent after Hurricane Maria hit the island over 2 years ago. This incident comes only days after a series of earthquakes hit the island, displacing thousands and dealing another blow to its infrastructure. Recently, U.S. President Donald Trump declared a major disaster in Puerto Rico, while also placing tougher restrictions on billions of dollars in delayed hurricane relief. Top representatives of the Venezuelan and Cuban governments, including Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, have met in the Bolivar Room of the Miraflores Palace in Caracas as part of the 20th meeting of the Intergovernmental Commission of the Cuba-Venezuela Cooperation Agreement. Cuba and Venezuela celebrated their achievements and consolidated their joint interests and objectives. The two countries are solidifying their bilateral ties as the United States continues to tighten illegal and deadly sanctions against them.
Dear friends of the Commission of the Bolivar-Martí Cooperation Agreement, this commission has developed. It's the 20th meeting, the 20th year, on the 20th day of 2020. In October of this year, we're going to remember and commemorate accordingly the signing of this agreement in 2000, which bears the names of Bolivar and Martí, signed by the Commander-in-Chief Fidel Castro and Supreme Commander Hugo Chavez, here, in this very presidential palace, right here. Commander Fidel Castro's visit to Venezuela was an unforgettable one. He travelled around the country, from the east, the plains. He was also here, in Plaza Bolivar, where he gave an unforgettable speech and spoke about doing much with little and a new culture of work.
Staying in Venezuela, the president of the National Assembly, Luis Parra, has announced he will request an investigation into the resources provided by the United States to the country's opposition lawmakers. This comes after the United States Agency for International Development, or USAID, admitted that since 2017, they have given around $467 million to the Venezuelan opposition, in particular to the self-proclaimed president, Juan Guaido. Allegedly, the funds were given to private organizations through contracts, donations, or cooperation agreements with the Guaido-led opposition. However, USAID has not disclosed a list of the organizations that received their funds. Still to come, the migrant plight intensifies in Greece due to winter weather. We'll take a look after the break. Welcome back. Demonstrators gathered in the British capital, London, to protest against the arrival of Venezuelan right-wing opposition figure Juan Guaido. The protesters condemned the UK for legitimizing the pretender to the Venezuelan presidency, whose support in his home country has dwindled following a number of failed coup attempts. Due to his lack of domestic strength, United States-sponsored Guaido is looking to curry favor with right-wing governments around the world. The demonstrators called for him to be put on trial.
I am here today because I think that those of us who believe in democracy, in the people voting, and respect for constitutionality need to make our voices heard. Guaido isn't the president, he's just a guy that declared himself president. That's not right. I believe and half the world agrees that Commander Nicolás Maduro is the president because he was elected by the people.
Let's take a look at how Juan Guaido illegally exited the Bolivarian nation this week to meet with his backers.
This is how Caracas looks today, in peace. No violence, no tanks, no foreign military forces, but still a war. The strategy that wants to point the weapons of the U.S. and its allies towards Venezuela now claims that this nation hosts terrorist groups. That was the topic discussed at a supposed counter-terrorism summit in Bogotá, where the red carpet was rolled out for Juan Guaido's arrival, a man who last year made a deal with Colombian paramilitary group Los Rastrojos to be smuggled into Colombia for one of his various failed coup attempts. The man who makes a deal with terrorist groups now speaks out against supposed terrorism.
Guaido had a meeting with AK Menor, AK Brother, and AK Cookies. They asked him for pictures, which I took on my own phone. I was then told that those pictures needed to be saved so that at a later date we could move freely through Venezuela with no military pressure on us. I heard that was the deal Guaido made with Los Rastrojos once he would take the presidency. He said he would let us move freely through the border region.
The goal of the United States is to overthrow President Nicolás Maduro, and as such, Mike Pompeo has met with Juan Guaido once again. Meanwhile, Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza, who is on a diplomatic visit to Iran, said that Pompeo still struggles to comprehend the monumental failure of the Venezuelan opposition, and that instead of promoting diplomacy, the U.S. prefers to send their puppet on a regional media show.
This is nothing but an attempt at giving Guaido a lifeline. They also want to gain support for this narrative against the government of Maduro, claiming it violates human rights and seeking to designate it as a narco-terrorist state. The next stage of this coup will be fought in foreign courts.
Meanwhile, the National Assembly's new leadership has continued to separate itself from Guaido's methods.
In relation to this tour lawmaker, whatever he's doing, he needs to justify what he's doing over there. I think this is a meaningless cliché at this point.
In the meantime, the National Assembly continues to work towards parliamentary elections later this year.
Thousands of asylum seekers are enduring Europe's cold winter in the open at the overcrowded Moria camp on Greece's Lesbos island. Some of the migrants have been stranded on the island for years due to the conservative Greek government's immigration policies, which have made it difficult for asylum applications to be processed on time. Currently, more than 19,000 asylum seekers are living at Moria, despite the camp only having capacity for 3,000 people. This has led to a severe shortage of basic amenities such as tents, water, and sanitation facilities.
Life is not well is condition. Is very house. It's not very no electric. It's very cold. It's night. Is family for a baby is very sick.
The Tunisian former finance minister has been appointed the country's new prime minister designate. Newly elected President Kais Saied appointed Elias Fakfak to the post after months of negotiations that followed elections last October. The new prime minister now faces a difficult task of forming a government within a month and getting approval from a divided parliament, which recently rejected the first proposed government.
What you are being asked to do is to form a government as soon as possible, starting tomorrow, Tuesday, 21st January.
South Africa's national carrier, South African Airways, has cancelled a number of domestic and international flights after failure to secure a bailout from the government to keep the struggling airline afloat. A statement by the airline said more than 20 flights from its Johannesburg to Cape Town and Durban have been cancelled. 10 flights between Johannesburg and the German city of Munich have also been cancelled. It added that this has been done to conserve cash and optimize the airline's position as it waits for capital injection from the national treasury. In 2019, the Chinese population surpassed 1,400 million inhabitants. However, the birth rate decreased remarkably, which means a challenge for the world's second biggest economy.
New figures confirm that China is still the most populated country in the world. In 2019, the Asian giant's population surpassed 1,400 million inhabitants. However, China's birth rate had its greatest decrease in the last 70 years.
The living conditions of young people have improved, so they spend more time enjoying their lives and their jobs. Consequently, they aren't having as many children.
The birth rate decrease and diminishing workforce due to the high number of elderly people is generating concern for the Chinese authorities regarding social and economic consequences.
People don't want to have children because of the high prices of things like housing. Having children is not the first option for young people anymore. There are other priorities.
In order to face this problem, in 2016, China abolished the one-child-per-family policy in order to increase the birth rate. However, this measure didn't manage to reverse the trend. Experts have warned about other conditions such as the high living costs, childcare expenses, labor demands, and the lack of daycare options.
Our generation has a huge weight on its shoulders. Our parents are getting older. Our kids are too young. We are still early in our careers. All of these things together could easily undo us.
President Xi Jinping's administration considers aging and the low birth rate as key elements for its economic and social agenda. Therefore, he has been implementing measures to face these challenges for the country's future.
And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Doris.